So in this video we're going to be covering what UV unwraps are. So I have a list of questions here. We're going to kind of go through all of them. So the first three I'll actually answer in one go. So it's what is a UV unwrap, how is it used, and why is it needed. So let's just drop a sphere into the scene real quick. I've already showed you guys how to add color to this, so I can just select the polygons I want, hit M for material, name this whatever I want, and then I can change its color, hit OK, and now the object in the scene matches that color. I can also just select a series of polygons, make a new material, and now these polygons are correspondingly that color. So what if I needed to do something a little bit more advanced, like I wanted to come in here and control what's going on with more than one color, like if I wanted to paint on this or something like that. So to do this, let's just clear the scene real quick, and let's open up a different scene that I have going. So this scene right here, I have this football that was made. So this guy has a UV unwrap and he has what's called a texture applied to it. So again, if I was to look at this guy's material color, go into its material, go to properties, go to this top tab, its diffuse color right now is just set to a gray color, but obviously this isn't coming up gray, it's coming up white where it has this stripe, it has some black and gold where it has the logo, and again the majority of the football itself is like a reddish brown color. So to be able to do this, we need to give this object in the scene an unwrap, and then what we're also going to do is apply what's called a texture to it, which is a 2D image. So let's bring that up real quick. This is the texture that is associated with this 3D object. So let's move him over here a little bit and make this guy a little bit smaller. So what you can think of a texture as initially is going to be a 2D representation of a 3D object. So if we look at this, we can kind of discern that I kind of cut this ball into 4 separate pieces, and then those 4 separate pieces get this color on the 2D image applied. So we can think of these little, what are called UV islands, get wrapped around this 3D object and the color gets applied. So again, going back to our questions, the what is a UV unwrap, that is again cutting up a 3D object so it can be, in a sense, converted into a 2D object we can then use to potentially apply textures to, do a handful of other things. How is it used? Again, turning it into a 2D object so we can throw color on it, and then why is it needed? Pretty much the same. So the next one is where is the unwrap itself located? So to see this, so this one again it was already made, it already has an unwrap, but if I want to see this or edit it again, up here towards the top you have these extra tabs. You have this UV edit tab. If this tab's not up here, you can click the little divider here and it should pop up. Otherwise you can go to layout, layouts, and then go to UV edit right here. All three lead to the same thing. So let's zoom out here, get kind of oriented, and then look over here. So again, if I look at this 2D image and I compare it to this shape over here, these are kind of the islands that are going on that comprise this 3D object. So if I look at this window right here, it's kind of divided into two. We have our 3D viewport on the left and then this UV editor on the right. So this UV editor itself we can navigate in kind of similar to navigating in 2D. So again, holding Option, we can kind of orbit around our object here. Holding Option, clicking and dragging let us pan around in this menu. Again, zooming is the Option key or the Alt key and then Control, and then you can zoom in and out. Same exact thing over here. And then alternatively in 3D, hold Alt and Shift and you can pan over here, and it's the same thing over here. So again, I can either hold Alt to pan or Alt and Shift to pan. It doesn't really matter. So jumping back over to our questions, the UV editor window or tab, what is it and how is it used? So jumping back over to 3D, this UV edit tab is comprised in a way that again we have our 3D viewport over here, our kind of 2D UV layout tab over here, and then you'll also notice over here on the left all of our buttons kind of change. We have these tabs here, so sculpt tools, paint tools, and then these UV tools. These ones are going to be the important ones. All these buttons right here, we'll go over the majority of them, are kind of the tools that you need to cut up your 3D object in a way that it makes sense in 2D so you can then apply a texture to it. And then our final question, at least right now in here, is going to be this little guy. It's not really a question, it's just more of a note. Move, scale, rotate in the UV editor, and then just a little hint, you can hold control to snap. So let's go over that real quick. So I'm just going to take this guy, move him out of the way, and we're just going to be ignoring the 3D aspect of this real quick. We're only looking at this 2D chunk over here. So I can grab these polygons here, and then with the same hotkeys of W, E, and R, I can move, scale, and rotate these just like I can a 3D object. Oops, let's go ahead and rotate that. So again, not anything too special. But again, I can orient these any way I like. If I want them to, let's say, for whatever reason, be going up and down like this, I can do that. It just depends. Usually, like ours, for example, we have some text going left to right. Let's look at the image here. So again, the text is right here. So having that going left and right, that was just a call by me when I initially organized these little islands, that I wanted my text to be readable when I brought the image up. So again, being able to move these around, scale them, rotate them, whatever, can come in handy. We'll go over more of that here in just a little bit. But the last thing I just wanted to show real quick is if I go, let's move him out of the way, to rotate this, I can either just manually rotate it at whatever degree, or I can manually put in degrees over here. So let's say I wanted it 90 degrees, for example, I could put it in to get an exact amount. Or if I hold the control key and then click and drag, it'll snap in little increments that are defaulted to 15. So 75, 90, 105, all the way back down to 0. So again, holding that control key lets you snap these, and it makes your life a little bit easier if you do need to organize these. Let's move our ball back over here. Now I'm going to go ahead and let's actually use our 3D, because I don't really know just right off the bat which one of these islands corresponds to the little Wilson here. I could technically look at the 2D one and say yes, the third one from the bottom's this one. Or a quick thing that I can do if I'm just not sure where it's at, so I can just select some of these polygons over the Wilson thing. Over here, I see that these are the ones that are selected, so I could just double click this tab. So now I'm selecting those corresponding polygons. So if I look at this 2D image, you can see that we have the football, kind of the top two halves on the top, bottom two halves on the bottom over here. But then we have this little empty space here, 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 and here. So to make this a little bit easier, what I want to do is make it to where I can see this 2D image in this 3D window. So to do that, what I'm going to do is just go to my shading tree, and then, again, I haven't went over how to apply these textures, but we will in a sec. But if I just click on this texture, so this texture right here is this 2D image just sitting in the 3D file. But if I click on him, it becomes visible in the 2D window over here. So I can just definitely see at this point, yes, this is the little island that has Wilson's tab on it. If I was to grab this island though and start moving it, you're going to see over here that it correspondingly starts to move. So let's move it a little bit more. A little bit more. You can kind of see the hang of this. So I could technically just grab this top half and align it up to this part right here. Again, it doesn't line up perfectly. I would have to either shift it one way or another, so move it just a little bit about right there. Now we have pretty much the same football with no logo, so this space right here just isn't getting used. But then we have the little plug hole here and here if we wanted to reinflate this. Alternatively, I could scale this down and move it into a spot of the texture that's not getting used here, and now just nothing kind of comes through. So again, however I move these islands, they're going to correspond to what pixels are kind of underneath and what gets displayed on my 3D object. So going back to our little reference sheet, the next thing I wanted to cover was a checker pattern. So this is kind of why would we add a checker pattern, and then how would I add a checker pattern. So let's actually just go in and delete this image. We're kind of starting from scratch. Deselect that so there's no image over here. And in this folder, what I have is just this little checker pattern right here. You can go to Google and just type in checker pattern. You can make your own in Photoshop. Doesn't really matter. But what I want to do is I want to apply this pattern to my 3D image. So to do this, the first thing you want to do is make sure that your object has material So let's pretend like I just modeled this football and it doesn't have a material. So what I'm going to do is grab all the polygons associated with this guy, hit M, let's just name this one ball, and then its material we can just throw. It's like a default gray. So now over here, and again, normally you're on this item tab, so I just popped over here to the shading tab, and now we have this new material called ball. Again, if I'm on the model tab, you might get some more tabs in here, but again, it's always just going to be on the shading one, and again, the material right here called ball. So going back to our UV edit window, what I want to do to add this is I just want to drag and drop this checker pattern either to my 3D object, which usually works, or I want to drag it above this new material that was created. So again, we have the base material that should just always be in your scene. We have this new material called ball, and this little red dot just means that this is a group and this is what it's comprised of. So right now this ball material group just has our little material in there. So I just want to put this checker pattern, just drag and drop him right in between the ball and the material. So wait for there to be a little line, let go of that, and that little guy snaps right in there. Alternatively, let's undo this a few times. I can just drag the checker pattern right onto the 3D object and it gets thrown into the same place. So going back to this guy, we have we just added, we'll show you how to add the checker pattern, but now is the big question of why. So while unwrapping this, right now, you can see this just gets thrown on and it just looks like a checker pattern on a ball. But if you don't have a good unwrap, what's going to happen is all these little squares aren't going to be square anymore. They're going to be either distorted or just unreadable as squares. So what we can use the checker pattern for is a check to make sure that our unwrap is good. So again, as long as the little squares on here look square and are uniform, so the squares on this chunk are as square and the same size as the squares on this chunk, as well as this one and this one, so all four being these four islands, we know that our unwrap's good. So some examples of a bad unwrap would be, let's go ahead and grab these, scale this guy down. So now we have big huge checkers on this one, little ones on this one. Ideally we'd want these to be the same size because again, a 2D image is comprised of, if I zoom way in, we got these little pixels right here. 2D image comprised of pixels. We want to have the same pixel density between these two objects. Because again, if there's, just like in the football, a white stripe that goes across the surface of this, we want it to look the same and not be, in a sense, really pixelated, kind of low quality compared to a different aspect of our 3D object. Let's go ahead and scale that back up so it looks good. Somewhere in there is fine. So the other thing would be if this was scaled in just one axis in a wrong way. Let's actually grab one of these top ones to work with. So let's scale this in and just squish it this way. So now, again, instead of having nice uniform squares, we have long skinny squares, which would correspond to long skinny pixels in our 2D texture. So again, we want to kind of have these be as uniform as possible. So let's actually clear this scene out, kill the material, and go back to the modeling tab. So again, adding that checker pattern is just kind of to make sure that what we're making is, as we're unwrapping it, looks correct. And it's just a visual representation. Once you get kind of used to unwrapping, you probably won't need to dump it in that checker pattern every single time. But just when you first get started out, it's really good to have that and say, does the texture on this look like a bunch of little squares? If yes, you have a good unwrap. If no, you probably have a bad unwrap. So now we're going to get kind of the meat and potatoes of this where it starts to get a little bit more difficult. And this is how do we unwrap? So let's just start with a box. Simplest primitive shape we can throw in here. Go to the UV Edit tab. So as you can see over here, it actually got thrown in by default with this as an unwrap. So the first kind of problem I'm seeing before I even throw a checker pattern on here is if I look at my 3D object, it's a square, but if I look at just this one little chunk, it's not a square. It's obviously a rectangle. I would want it to be something more like this if it was to be a square. So ideally, I could just grab this, scale it down, and around there it's pretty much square, but again, it's not 100% perfect. So just because, let's go ahead, add a material to this, call it box, and to the box, let's throw this checker pattern on it and take a look. So again, as expected, our little squares, instead of being squares, are little rectangles. So again, getting back to our main question, how do we unwrap? There's a few different ways you can do it as far as the very primitive aspect of how to do it. You can either select edges and cut those to unwrap, or you can select faces and group those together to unwrap, and then again, there's going to be various unwrap settings with those. So let's look at these kind of one thing at a time, and I'll actually just take this unwrap, scale it way down, and move it over here for now just so it's out of the way. So let's do the face unwrap first. This is kind of the least useful of the two, but sometimes it can be helpful. So let's just grab one face and unwrap it. So again, we're on this UV edit tab over here, we're on this UV tab up here. So I'm just going to left click unwrap. So this kind of turns on the unwrap tool. Just like any other tool, I get my various settings down here. And then to activate that tool, I hover over the 3D viewport and I right click. So this unwrapped this face and it threw the entire thing onto our checker pattern like this. So if I look at it here, go to the top view, comparatively bring up our image, we get the same thing. There's no big surprises here. It just grabbed that one face, threw over here one face. Again, I can move, scale, and rotate this wherever I want, and we have one face that's unwrapped. So if I grab this face and this face, since this is this one that I kind of already unwrapped, but if I select it again and then add that to another one, left click on our unwrap, hover over the 3D viewport, right click, now it unwrapped kind of two faces, so this face and this face. So again, I can rotate this, make it a little more square, make it big, make it small, do whatever. So let's leave this one here and see what happens. Let's go over here and grab, let's say, this face and this face, which correspond to, again, our old unwraps up here. So left click, right click, now we have this portion unwrapped, and again, this place right here, the one that we just had unwrapped, this didn't move at all. So let's make this a little bit more apparent. Make it about a 45-degree angle right in the dead center of the screen. Now let's grab these two faces again, shrink them down, move them out of the way. And then in our 3D viewport, grab these two faces again, being mindful of these two faces right here, left click, right click. These two faces just got a new unwrap. The unselected faces didn't move, so these were the unselected faces, these were the unselected faces, so again, we didn't affect those ones unwrap. So let's try something new. Let's select all the faces, hit unwrap, and see what happens. So left click, hover over the 3D viewport, right click, we get something kind of weird. So again, we've never seen this before. Let's move this away from the picture so we can see it. We have a red polygon that's in here. Instead of before, we'd have kind of a gray one. So let's look at this and see what happens. And I'm just going to undo to move this back. So if I look, this front face seems like it's okay. Go on to the back face seems like it's okay. The top, it actually just has a bunch of vertical lines going through it, as well as the side, the bottom, and this side as well. So let's, using our 3D viewport, let's select the ones that look good. So this front one looks good. Zoom out on the left one. Let's move this over here. So that one looks good. Let's grab this back one, left click him, move him over here. So here's one face, here's another face. But we actually have these lines right here. But if I select polygons, there's no polygon right here. I can click on it, click on the outsides. So let's lasso select around this whole thing and see what happens. Yep, it grabs all these outside polygons. So what it did with these, it just made it infinitely thin right here. So this, I can zoom in all the way, and this is just a really, really thin line. So in a sense, you can think of this as I can see all these squares going horizontally through here back and forth because they correspond to these pixels right here. So this is one of the lines back and forth, a line, a line. So this isn't ideal at all. So, okay, selecting all the faces doesn't work. Again, if it would, then unwrapping wouldn't be a thing. It'd just be select all the faces, hit unwrap, and you'd be good to go. But let's go ahead and just grab 1, 2, 3 faces. Let's see what it does. So left click, right click. Okay, it handles that 1, 2, 3. So let's try 1, 2, 3, 4. Left click, right click. Okay, something weird happened. It gave me a weird diamond shape. If I look at the checker pattern over here, okay, this, in a sense, triangle looks right, but this one looks really weird. Same thing with this one. Half of it looks kind of right, the other half looks really weird. These sides are both fine, because again, they're over here. But again, something weird happened. So let's go ahead and select all these guys. So something with the unwrap doesn't like it when you have, in a sense, a circle or a loop of polygons. You have to split up that loop in some way. So if I was to select this polygon, and this polygon, so we don't have a loop anymore, let's unwrap it and see what happens. Left click, right click. Oh, something bad happened again. And again, this was to be expected. So again, the reasoning behind this is let's just go ahead, hit Shift H, so I'm hiding all but what I just unwrapped. So if I look at it over here, it kind of corresponds. We have one face, another face, another face, but these aren't coming out square. They're coming out like weird trapezoids all pushed together. Because if you think about this, what we're doing is unfolding a 3D box. So if you had a cardboard box sitting in front of you, and you, in a sense, cut off all of these edges or faces that we can't see, and you just had these, there's really no way to fold this flat, because as soon as you push this corner, it's got its kind of diagonal support that's protecting it or giving it support. So ideally what we'd need to do would be, in a sense, cut one of these edges, and that gets into our next thing, selecting edges for the unwrap. So let's just keep our other faces hidden, and with the edges selected, what we're going to do is let's just have all these outside edges selected, and let's just grab one of these edges right here. So again, we can think of this, if this is our cardboard box, these edges on the outside are already cut out, but we're going to add this cut right here, so we're just taking a knife, stabbing it in this corner, and kind of cutting it all the way to this corner. So left click, right click. Okay, now it gives me a good unwrap, because if I was to break this off, so let's just do a quick cut paste, go to the front view. I'm just going to change where this is rotating from, rotate this guy up, grab this one, go to the right view, change where it's rotating from, go back to perspective, rotate this guy up. This is kind of what we can think of what happened here. So again, this isn't super complicated when you're thinking of it as a box, but again, it can get slightly more complicated if you get a really, in a sense, complex shape that has a little bit more going on. But ideally, this is the same thing. I kind of just made our 3D box into, move it just like this, our 2D representation. So let's undo that, so we go back to where our box was. So fold that side down, fold that side down. Now what I want to do is quick U to unhide, so now I have these 3 faces that weren't, in a sense, unwrapped. So let's unwrap those, and again we get our weird trapezoidal unwrap that we had before where things aren't square. So again, comparing it to this one, if I look at these, we have perfect little squares on every one of these sides. But again, this one, we're going to have weird, kind of a bad unwrap in a sense. So again, let's go back to cutting edges. So let's go ahead and just cut out the top portion. Hit unwrap, hit go. So kind of two things happened with this. So it unwrapped the top, but since I had the edges, I was unwrapping with edges. When you do that, it kind of unwraps everything that's visible in the scene, unlike in polygon mode. So again, this is my current unwrap in polygon mode. If I select a polygon, hit unwrap, all it's going to do is unwrap that one selected polygon. So again, all these polygons right here should stay exactly where they are. So click this guy, left click, hover over the 3D viewport, right click, as expected. This new face gets a new unwrap, these guys don't get affected. But we had this face selected, it was right here. Let's go ahead and select this face, hit unwrap, so left click, right click. So again, this one changed its shape, this one got re-unwrapped and thrown in the corner. So again, when you're doing this by edge, it's going to re-unwrap everything in the scene. So if I just select one edge, hit unwrap, right click, it's going to say, wow, you had a perfectly enclosed box, you made one cut into it right here, I can unfold that, and it gives me a really strange result. So again, this one's so infinitely thin that I just get kind of a mirage of this weird pink color here, green color here, and that's where I get it, kind of again, pink color here, green color here. It's just, again, a horrible, unusable unwrap in a sense. Because again, if I zoom in on this, I have pixels right here, but these pixels don't correlate to any surface area, it's just a line going through here. So again, really, really terrible unwrap. So let's start cutting up this box in a different way. So let's, again, we have our one cut right here, we can do that, cut it, and we get, this looks fine, this one area right here looks kind of gross. So if I start experimenting with this, because again, we kind of reached our max for unwrapping faces, I could always do like 3 edges like this, hit unwrap. Okay, these 3 are good. Let's rotate those, orient them. Now select these remaining ones, unwrap. So something like this. This is an okay unwrap. Again, if I look at these, the checker patterns look good all the way around this. It just depends on kind of what look I'm going for. The other thing that we'd kind of want to do is not make sure that, again, these islands aren't diagonal. That would be bad. Other things we would want to avoid would be, if I was to move this guy over here, these overlapping. So again, if they overlap, it's going to show up where they overlap in this red area. Because again, if I wanted this square right here to be red with blue text and this one to be green with pink text, right here would be an overlapping area, so I couldn't have, in a sense, in a 2D image, I couldn't have 2 different types of pixels kind of on top of each other. It's just going to look right here, see a green pixel, and this spot on this side is going to, this spot on this piece is going to show up in green, and the same spot on this side is going to show up in green. You don't get to really have that overlap and have customizable area. Other thing, again, I'm probably going to want to have these a little bit more straight. So something like that. And again, later on I can show you guys align tools to make this stuff line up perfect. So again, if I wanted to line this up in one piece, what I'd want to do is again use edge mode, because again, there's no way to select all these edges, unwrap it in one go, and get one piece. So let's keep experimenting with cutting edges and unwrapping. So again, we have this one cut out, so let's try adding these edges to it. Hit unwrap, see what happens. So again, I get 2 good squares and then this little weird jumbled area. So let's actually deselect this edge right here. So when we unwrap this, we get these 2 polygons together. So again, this would be similar to selecting these 2 polygons, hitting unwrap, right-clicking. But since we did it with edges selected, we just put kind of an edge boundary, so the knife in our cardboard box cut right here, but it also cut this unselected shape as well. So let's keep going with this. We had these cuts in here. So let's go ahead and add another one. So 1, 2, 3. And let's deselect this cut. So let's see what this gives us. So again, just like before, we get a 3 and 3 scenario. So we get 1, 2, 3 on this island, and then 1, 2, 3 on this island. So let's go again. I just switched back to edge mode over here and I actually remembered what I had selection wise. Let's say I accidentally like misclicked and it deselected that. I'm not going to want to go in and have to reselect these. Oops. Just like this. I mean, it didn't take forever, but if you have a bigger thing that you're unwrapping, that takes a really long time. If you want to kind of get back to where you were with your unwrap, so kind of where those invisible cuts are that correspond, over here you have select and then select UV border. So if I click on that, it remembered where I kind of cut my box, so it adds those for me. So let's deselect this one and add here and here. So now let's just try to mentally look at just our 3D object and see how this is going to come out. We have this face right here, this face right here, and then this one, and then it goes up into this one. So again, deselect this, him and him. So again, faces that are connected, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then these two edge ones, they kind of have cuts that go all the way around these outsides. Let's unwrap this and see what happens. Left click, right click. So now we get 1, 2, 3, 4. We could never get that before when we selected polygons. Again, if I look at what's selected over here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we get these two edges right here, or two polygon faces. So if I just deselect this top one, deselect that top one, hit unwrap, right click, now I get this all in one big piece. It's a big T shape. So let's switch back. Now I can just kind of manipulate which edges are selected. So let's reselect these. So I'm adding cuts here, and I'm taking away cuts in the like imaginary cardboard box here. See what happens. Unwrap, right click. So now instead of it being 4 with a T on the top, it's kind of this little cross where it's 1 and then 2 and then 3 going across like this. And again, if I was to move that down again, these two pieces in a sense would just move down here and connect, and then if I moved it down again, they'd move right here and connect. So again, there's really infinite ways I can cut this box up. Also, if I wanted to, I could just select every single edge, left click, right click. Now every edge has its own, in a sense, UV island. So there's kind of good things and bad things with this. We'll kind of go into more detail about that later. But realistically, just know that there's many, many ways you can cut up one object. On that note though, what you want to do is technically when you're unwrapping something, you want to have the least amount of cuts as you can in the object. And in a sense over here, the fewer amount of islands. So again, I can technically just cut this up so there's 6 islands over here, orient these whatever way that I see fit, and kind of call it a day. But later down the road, that's potentially going to cause problems. So again, a better unwrap for this would be a scenario. Oops. Let's go ahead and do this kind of one piece at a time. So again, I want to have this be the top, and then this be the next piece. Those guys would flap out, and then the bottom would come around here. So let's kind of make that happen. Cut, cut. These ones would be connected. Cut these around here. Now let's see if that folds out correctly. Bam, just like I was hoping to have like a lowercase t shape. So now we have, in a sense, one island that comprises all of our shapes. And from here we should be good. So this next little guy over here is packing UVs. So what is packing, why should we pack, and then what's auto-packed. So let's actually copy paste. So now we have 2 boxes in the scene, and when I did that, you've seen over here these polygons turn to red, because again, if you copy and paste something, the majority, almost all of its properties transfer over. So this box that I copied, the pasted version over here, has the same material and it has the same unwrap. If it had any other custom things, those would probably transfer as well, depending on what they were. So let's go ahead, grab this, move it over, and go from here. So again, now we have one scene that kind of has 2 objects in it. So let's say we want to make 2 dice, or die if we're going to do plural. But anyways, let's say that one of the die we want to be red, the other die we want to be blue. So over in our UV window, looking at this, we could, let's shrink these down so they can both fit. There we go. So from here, we can look at these, and I couldn't have a red dye and a blue dye if these are stacked on top of each other. Then I just have 2 blue dye or 2 red dye. So what I need is kind of unique texture space for each of these. So this little guy gets his own set of pixels, let's say up here. This guy gets his own set of pixels down here. So what packing is organizing our kind of UVs that we need to make in a way that it wastes the least amount of space. Because again, let's say that looking at this checker pattern, this is kind of the image that we're making that's going to correlate to our 3D object. And let's just look at that real quick. Move this up a little bit. So right now this is a 1024 by 1024 image. So 1024 pixels wide by 1024 pixels tall. So ideally with games or movies or anything, what you want to have is, if you're going to have an image attached to something, you want to make sure that that image is as useful as it can be. So again, if we had this dye, so let's call this one the red one, this one blue one, if we had these arranged like this, yeah, we could probably see that there's whatever 5 dots on this one, 5 dots on this one, whatever. But the bad thing is there's going to be all this wasted space that is just going to be blank and kind of taking up, in a sense, just empty space that we don't need. So ideally what we want to do is, before we start applying color to these, let's say they're dye, we want to arrange these in a way that it wastes the least amount of space. So let's grab this guy, rotate it around 180 degrees, move him up like this, and now let's scale this up a little bit. So what I'm trying to do is make sure that I stay within this single box right here. So this is where the image is showing up. Even if I didn't have an image over here like this, I kind of have my green line right here, my red line right here, and then these black ones here. This is what we refer to as one-to-one space. So again, looking at it right here, if this was a little graph, this would kind of be 0, 0 on that graph. All the way over here, this would be 1, 0. So go over in the x-axis 1, and then up 0. So it's right here. This would be 1, 0, and this would be 1, 1. So again, this area right here is what we consider our one-to-one space. So I want to pack these UVs to fit within this space without going over the edges. So as soon as I move him up here, now all of kind of this section right here is outside a one-to-one space. And we also want to make sure that we don't have any overlap like this, because again, if we wanted a 2 different color dye, there'd be a conflict right here where one of the dye would have the wrong color on it. Let's move this over. And the other thing that you want to do, which we won't get into a lot in this class probably, is going to be what's called padding, and that's just ideally, get this back on here. What I want to do is I want to have this island or UV island far enough away from this island that this color right here doesn't bleed onto this color over here. So looking at, again, if I look at just how this checker pattern is built out, these little guys are individual pixels. Let's zoom out and pretend like these bigger ones are individual pixels. If I look at this line right here, it's halfway through this pixel. So if I move this one over and it's too close to that, if this in fact was a pixel and it was a red pixel, for example, for our red dye, there would be a tiny little area on this guy, this little chunk right here, that would be the wrong color. So again, making sure that we just have a little bit of a gap in between there is gonna, in a sense, save us. So ideally, if stuff's feeling a little bit too close, you can just scale it down a little bit. Move him up towards a corner, move him up towards a corner as well. And for the same reasoning, we want to make sure that this isn't touching that edge. Just have it a little distance away from the edge and a little distance away from here and here, and you should be good. So essentially what I just did by organizing these 2 pieces here and here was I, in fact, packed the UVs. So let's go ahead and just screw these up real quick. So this one's really big, this one's really small, and they're oriented over here. So again, if I started at this point, I could easily go back, unrotate these, unscale them, whatever, to get back to where I had one right here and one right here. But Moto has a cool feature that it auto packs all of this stuff for us. So it's just this little button right here. Let's hit pack. So what it's going to do is it's going to do kind of 3 different operations, and then those operations have multiple settings. So it's going to pack them, stretch them, and orient them. So you can just think of this as move, scale, and rotate. So if we turn off the bottom 2, so just pack, it's going to move them over into one. It's going to try to move them into this 1-to-1 space right here. Undo that, hit pack again. Now let's just hit stretch. Now it's not going to move them, it's not going to rotate them. It's just going to, if I look over here, we have big checkers over here, little checkers over here. It's just going to stretch them and try to make them the same size relative to each other. So looking over here, we have a big one and a small one. Hit OK. Now we have a medium one and a medium one. And lastly, go to pack and check the orient one. Hit OK. Now it's just going to rotate both of these so they're facing the same direction in a sense. And sometimes that rotation one can be a little bit weird. If you have like a curved shape, it won't know what way's straight, because again, it doesn't have a straight edge like this to kind of match up to. So let's hit pack, and let's pack, stretch, and orient. So move them, scale them, and rotate them into place. Hit OK. So it tried. This pack isn't going to be your best solution all the time. So just to prove this point, I have this down here. Oops. This little area right here. I have this UV coverage area. So right now it says 36.1 whatever percent. So 36% of this 1-to-1 space is being used up by my 3D objects. So ideally we want to get this percentage as close to 100% as we can. Because again, we want to make sure that we're using up the texture to its fullest. So again, the farther away from 0 this is, the better. So let's just manually pack this and see if we can get better than 36%. So let's go back to what we had before. Let's actually just grab both of these and actually just cancel that. There's orient pieces right here, so it's not going to try to do all of them. So let's orient those, so now we at least have these at correct angles. Rotate that 90 degrees. Move these close to each other. Now let's move these down. So I'm still at that same 36% right here, but now if I scale this up, what it's going to do is both of these patches right here, they're going to take up more surface area. Let's move that down a little bit more. Somewhere like that. There we go. And again, to select these, I just kind of raycast over both 2 pieces, hold shift, double click, it grabs all of them. So now as I scale this value up, notice this value down here is going to increase. So it's at 36. Scale it up to about there. Now it's at 45. So we just, for easy numbers, we just got essentially an extra 10% roughly pixel usage of our texture. That's not to say that the rest would have to be wasted. Technically, again, just because we did dice, if we're going with a board game motif, we could have a little piece right here or a little piece right here and have separate 3D objects in the scene. But regardless, this number being higher is in almost all cases better. So going back over here in the packing section, we went over what is packing, why to pack, how to pack, auto pack, all that stuff. So let's go over a handful of common issues. So this one leads into something that's a little bit separate, multiple UV maps. So if I go over here, this right here on the UV Edit tab, this is kind of the visual representation of our unwrap, but technically there's a place in Moto where this is stored, and where that is actually, you have this properties tab that's normally listed over here, so properties, channels, and lists. So let's open up lists, and inside of lists you have this little top column, and in this drop down you have UV maps. So there's this little guy right here called texture. So let's right click him, hit delete. It says, are you sure you want to delete this? Let's hit yes. So over here you see this thing got deleted, and over here that texture pattern disappeared. So let's undo that to get this back. So to add more of these, what you can do is just hit new map right here. It's kind of grayed out. So we'll just call this one texture 2. Hit OK. Now this thing disappeared because I have texture 2 selected. So I can go back, select texture 1, and I can see that. Now I can select texture 2. Let's just grab all these edges, make this a little more even. Hit unwrap, so left click, right click. So now I have this as an unwrap, so let's pack this stuff. So stretch, orient, all that stuff. So again, it's a little bit weird, so let's do this one at a time. Let's orient it at first, and now pack, turn off orient. Sometimes, again, automated things work different. So hit pack. So now I have all these little guys packed in here real tight, but they're separate islands. And again, it lets us, by default, you should have a little bit of a distance between each island, and it also has a little bit bigger of a distance between the boundary of your one-to-one space. So now I can go over here, click texture 2, click texture 1, kind of go back and forth all day. Realistically, students will have problems if they have multiple textures over here and not really know it. So let's go into a practical example of that. So again, just popped up my football scene real quick. So looking at this guy, right now he just has this one texture applied. Let's grab another one. Again, call this texture 2. Give it a different unwrap. And unwrap it. So now we have kind of the top half of the ball and the bottom half of the ball. So we have these two textures here. I'm not changing how it's applied to our ball itself, but realistically, if I look at this island right here, it doesn't line up anymore to our 2D image that I have in this background here. Neither does this one. Let's just make it small, slide it over here. Let's make this one all the way small. So realistically, this top half of the football should technically be all gray, because that's what we have in our image here. And this bottom half of the football should be all this brown color, which kind of it is. So let's switch these around. So blah, 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 just to prove that neither of those cases are happening. So again, if I have the wrong texture applied to my image over here, and I don't know that there's two different textures here, I might open my file, throw the texture image on here, so this little football image, drag and drop him, and it might assign the wrong UV map. So I might have spent all that time lining this up perfect like this, and it might apply it to this guy over here, and I won't really understand, hey, why is the top half of my ball all this brown color, the bottom half all gray, when I put this image on here? Because again, the reasoning behind this, for this case of this problem, would be you had two textures applied, or two UV maps applied, and the texture was applied to the wrong one. So if that was the case, you could just come in here, delete this texture, hit OK. Now that texture is gone. You see over here. Go over here. Now I have this texture. Now there's a chance when you delete that one, it might delete your image over here. So if that's the case, you can come over here, delete this image, and then just re-drag and drop your texture image on top of your football, and it should work out. So again, coming in here, making sure that you don't have multiple texture maps applied, or UV maps, and you should be good to go. So jumping back into this scene, we'll actually look at our other issues. So your other big one, and this is probably going to be the biggest one, is geometry errors. So you'll go in, try to unwrap your object, you'll get really frustrating at UV unwraps, but it's not because, in a sense, Moto's behaving wrong, it's because your model's wrong and you don't technically know it. So let's muster up an example real quick. So with this example, we have seemingly the same two cubes. I just deleted the bottom off. So what I'm going to do is try to select the same edges on these and see if I get the same results with the unwrap. So let's do these back two edges, and let's just do this one right here. So let's unwrap both of these, and ideally, since it's the same scenario, the unwrap should be the same. So go to unwrap, and something really weird happened. So we're not sure what, so let's go ahead and deselect this one. Hit unwrap, right click. I get a predictable unwrap. Everything worked just fine. So let's reselect this one. So I'm selecting all these edges on the bottom, and pretty much all of them but this edge right here. So again, I should get a weird shape where it has this almost L shape and then the weird trapezoid. So unwrap, and I'm hitting unwrap right now and it's not really doing anything. It's just giving me this weird vertical line. If I move it, I actually have, for whatever reason, a weird point right here. So let's take a look at this in the model tab and see what's wrong. So chances are if you try to unwrap something and it doesn't give you a super predictable result, chances are it's something wrong with your model. So let's look at this correct one at first. So if I'm looking over here, it kind of says what I have selected, how many polygons, faces, whatever. So let's double click it at first. It says 5 polygons. Let's double click this one. This one says 13 polygons. So let's just give this a quick once over visually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, it should be 5 polygons, but it's saying it's 13 polygons. So let's do this kind of at the next level. Let's go to the vertice mode. Let's middle mouse click, lasso select, so I'm selecting all the way through because I want to see if there's multiple edges sitting on here. So one vertex, 1. That one's 2 because I selected 2, so 1, 2, 1, 1, and 1. So let's grab this one. It's like this. Okay, that one says there's 2 vertices there. This one says there's 1. This one says there's 1. This one says there's 2, 2, 2. Okay, this one says it has 3. This one has 3. And this one has 2. So obviously something is wrong with this mesh at this level. So again, one trick you can kind of do to potentially see if anything's wrong is if you hit the tab key, you can kind of see what's going on with your mesh. So ideally when I smooth these, it's actually turned off our texture image so we can just see the wireframe of this. Ideally both of these would be the same, but obviously they're not. So there's something wrong with the mesh. I did it, so I know what's wrong with it. So the problem with this was I extruded 2 of these faces, but I never actually moved them after I extruded them. So technically if I just go to mesh edit, hit extrude, so left click, right click, I just extruded this face. But if I hit the backspace key, spacebar, click off of it, whatever, it's going to keep that 3D change made. So pull that out. It has that extra cut that got put in there, but the edge just never really, the face never moved out. So when I go to unwrap that, chances are, let's move him out, I'm selecting this edge. I'm selecting these edges, but I'm not selecting this edge right here. So this edge isn't getting cut, so it's giving me a really weird scenario. So ideally, what you'd want to do to fix this is, again, you can do your method of coming in here one at a time, looking and saying, okay, 3 vertices, something's wrong, 2 vertices, something's wrong, 2 vertices, 1 vertice, nothing's wrong. So let's try a mesh cleanup real quick and see if that gets it. Mesh cleanup, everything checked, hit OK. So we have 2-point polygons. So those are pretty much a face sitting directly on top of a face. There's 8 of those. Merge vertices, 24 of those. And merge disco values, 12. So let's hit OK. Now let's check this guy. So 1, 1, 1, 1. It seems like it checks out. So let's hit the tab key. Now I get both the same smoothed object. So again, that mesh cleanup is going to save you really easily. Other thing, I just undid it a few times, so now if I look back at this, now I have 2 vertices, or 3, and then 3 again, 2 again. I could technically just go in here and manually do this. So vertice, do a join average on him, got a hotkey for it, join average, join average, join average. That one's got 2, 2, 1, 1, so total there should be 8 vertices. Grab all of it, 8, grab all of this one, 8, set tab, and they both look the same. So you can manually go in and clean that up, or you can go in and kind of have Moto do it for you with mesh cleanup. The only thing that mesh cleanup's not going to get is, let's go to extrude this, and let's just move this up just a tiny bit. So if I zoom way in, I have an edge that's really close to another edge, and it doesn't matter how close or far away this is, it can be super close like that. But if I zoom way out, it doesn't really look, it just looks like a 6-sided cube, or I guess 5-sided because there's no bottom on it. So again, this would be one, hit tab, obviously there's something different between the two, so that should be my kind of thing that tells me something's wrong. But if I went to unwrap this, I wouldn't be grabbing, if I zoom way in, this little extra edge or these extra edges. So that would cause quite a bit of heartache if I was going to unwrap this. So with this, since these two vertices aren't directly on top of each other, it's not like sitting in the exact same 3D space like this right here, it's just really close. If I do a geometry mesh cleanup, hit OK, okay, we have that happen, but it still has these two separate vertices. So this is something where I'd be better off selecting one vertice, okay, two, zoom in on that, see what's happening. Oh, I have an extra edge loop that's really close. Remove that, and now I have the same two shapes. So again, if you're in a sense modeling something kind of dirty or doing things that aren't correct modeling wise, when you go to unwrap it, that's just going to kind of like snowball into a nightmare, and it's just going to be really annoying. So that's why initially when you start modeling, get into good habits and practices and make sure that you kind of know what you're doing before you go in and start making a million cuts everywhere. It's just going to save you a bunch of time later down the road when you go to unwrap. So looking back at our common issues, the one that we just covered, geometry errors, that's obviously you potentially modeled something wrong and it's making the unwrap difficult. So this next one, having multiple shapes in one scene, so there's kind of a couple different ways you can handle this. One, I can just be mindful of, let's say, I'm just going to cut these up like this so they just make two little plus signs. And I actually want to make sure the bottom cuts off as well. Unwrap, hit cut. When there's a hole in the mesh, sometimes you can get away with not selecting that and it'll just cut it for you. But sometimes it doesn't really happen like this. It'll just show a little, in a sense, like a red polygon here. If it does that, what it's trying to do is tell you you should cut here. But over here in these properties, you can hit this little seal holes button, and what this is going to do is make it to where you don't necessarily have to select those edges. But again, if there's a red box, you can just grab the edges that have the hole, or again, you can just uncheck that seal holes thing. So again, this is the unwrap I'm going for, just this quick plus. So if I want to tweak this, so this one doesn't have the plus shape, it has whatever other weird shape, and I'm not going to be touching this one. So again, this one on the, let's rearrange these so they make a little more sense. One on the left, one on the right. So this left one, I'm going to call this one good, but I want to change the unwrap to the one on the right. So let's do this for cuts, something like this. So it gives me a different result. Since I'm not selecting any of the edges on here, usually what it's going to do is it's just going to unwrap kind of the edges that I have selected. It sees that I'm selecting this mesh, so it knows that I'm not touching any edges on this mesh, so it shouldn't touch the unwrap. But in older versions of Modo, what's going to happen is it's going to think that since you have no edges selected on this, you want some type of an unwrap like this. So again, no edges selected. This is the unwrap I get. So this one on the left will perform that correctly, but this one on the right, it'll try to unwrap that with no edges selected. So to get around that, and again, newer Modo, you don't really need to worry about this, but older versions you do. What I could do is I could just hide this one. So again, under view, I can hit hide selected. So now this is the only one showing. Now I can select these edges, hit unwrap, position this wherever I want it, and then unhide, and now this one's good. Alternatively, if you have a ton of stuff in one scene, what you can do is I can just grab him, make a new mesh over here, so I already have an empty one, but if I didn't, I could just hit N for a new mesh, rearrange this wherever I want it, or add item, I could do recent, and then meshes are in there, but again, mesh is also right here. So again, now I just have this empty mesh, so I'm just going to grab him, cut, and paste him into a separate mesh. Now, select the texture here. I could unwrap this one. The unselected mesh, so the inactive mesh, is going to show up just like it does over here. So wireframe over here, black wireframe over here, and then we're kind of good to go. I can unwrap this one, and I can switch to this mesh, unwrap this one. When everything's all good to go, I can grab this if I want to, cut and paste them so they're back in the same mesh, or again, I can leave them in two separate meshes. It doesn't matter either way. So the other thing, let's go over here, is how would I go about exporting this unwrap to Photoshop? Because again, going back to our football, ideally I won't just look at a blank page in Photoshop and know where to put these things. Ideally I'm going to want some type of guide to tell me where those UV islands are. So let's go ahead and just use this scene for an example. What I want to do is, let's just do pack orient everything, go, call this good. So what I want to do is I want to get kind of this information into Photoshop kind of as easily as possible. So to do this, again, I have my 3D objects in the scene, my texture is selected, or my UV unwrap called texture is selected right here. Again, this is just the name. I can name this whatever I want. So to get this to Photoshop, what you do is with this selected, you go to Texture, Export UVs to EPS. I'll just call this UVs, throw it on my desktop, hit save. So now it's going to just ask file stuff. You can just leave this at default, hit OK. Now what I'm going to do is go into Photoshop. And again, this just saved to my desktop, so let's minimize Moto real quick. It's right here on my desktop. It's just this uv.eps file. Drag and drop. Now it's going to ask me how big do I want it. So I'm going to say in pixels, I want it, let's say 512 by 512. The other important thing is we want to do RGB color, not CMYK. CMYK is for printing. RGB would be for digital things. And then resolution at 72 pixels per inch is fine. Hit OK. Now let's resize this a bit. And we can close this brush menu. So now if I zoom in on this, you're going to see, depending on resolution, kind of a faint outline of what these boxes are. So that's just on this layer 0. So let's duplicate this and then flatten the layer. So Command E, do that a couple times, duplicate, Command E, duplicate, Command E. Now I have darker lines that I can kind of see what's going on with this. So again, this is only a 5-sided box, but let's say that I wanted to color one red and one blue like we said before. So let's hit new layer. This top layer right here, I don't want to actually paint on him. This was the one that we brought in, so we'll just call this UV unwrap, and we'll put him on the top. This bottom one, we'll call this base color. Just grab our lasso select, go in, fill this one, desaturated blue color, and the other space, it's just a new layer, put it below this one, fill it with a red. Let's flatten these, and I'll have to go ahead and rename this base color. So now just for fun, let's go ahead and make a third layer. Get a new color and change our pen size. So we'll just put some numbers on here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, since this is in 3D space, I'm just writing these so I can see them. So again, let's do this over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So again, these ones are going to come in diagonal. These ones should come in straight. So actually, before I save this, actually let's do that just so you can see what it looks like. So we'll call this new texture. Just make it a JPEG, throw it on the desktop. Hit OK. That saved out. Let's go back to Moto real quick. And let's apply this texture that we just made to these images. So new texture, drag and drop it on the boxes. And we get this as a result. So again, this one, everything was upright. So just because it was upright in our 3D viewport, this one, it's definitely not upright over here. Same thing with the 2, 4, 3. None of this stuff is kind of facing the same direction. And this one is going to be kind of facing all diagonals, but again, none of them facing the right direction. So this is when, before you make a texture, you want to kind of do some pre-planning and say, okay, this is like this side of the box, up is this edge. So if I go over here, if up is this edge, then I'd need to orient this thing, dun 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 dun, rotate it that way. But now it doesn't line up with my texture anymore. If I look at the 3, now it's kind of going the right way. Let's look at the 5. 5's definitely going the right way. So sometimes when you're doing your unwrapping and your packing, you want to kind of plan for this. Alternatively, I could just jump in Photoshop, take all of my numbers, and rotate. Like I could grab the 5, rotate it counterclockwise 90 degrees. Same thing with this one, counterclockwise. The 4, rotate it clockwise, and the 3, I can really rotate it any way I want. But the other thing I want you to notice is these edges are showing up as black now. So let's go to this one. These edges are showing up as black, but it's kind of like a little polka dotted line, whereas this one's a straight line. So let's go back into Photoshop and let's look at this. So if I zoom in on these, we get straight lines here, because again, they're straight. If I go into here, since these are little pixels, that's why it looks polka dotted. Because again, let's go over to this blue guy. What it's doing is it's reading these square pixels and it's kind of softening them up a little bit. So this is your pixels coming in kind of bad. So ideally, I don't want big huge black lines calling out where all my edges are. I mean, when there's no texture on there, I appreciate it when I'm modeling because I like to know where edges are, but when I want to have a red box, let's say, I don't want those showing up like that. So to get rid of these, zoom out, what I'm going to do is just come over here, this UV unwrap, I'm just going to turn him off like so. Now save it out. So do that same, what do we do, JPEG format, UVs, hit save, overwrites, click on Moto. Now let's double check. Actually, I saved it out as a different type, just a different name. So this one was new texture, this one was UVs. So let's kill that. And this is just for consistency's sake. Go back to here. And let's save this one out as a JPEG and call it that same name. So just find it over here, new texture.jpg, hit save. Now I want to replace that old one, hit OK. Now it's overriding that one and updating that save file. Now when I close Photoshop, go back into Moto, it's going to give me this little alerts thing. And what this is just telling me is an image was updated, so I can either dismiss it and keep stuff how it is or hit reload. So let's hit reload and close this little image out. So now you see these little guys come in and I can see the black lines that Moto provides, but if I turn wireframe off, now there's no black lines, there's just the lighting that changes between these. No little polka dots going down this one. Just looks a lot cleaner. So again, kind of going back and forth from Photoshop to Moto, what you want to do is have your texture selected, do a texture, export UVs to EPS. That'll give you that EPS file, drag that into Photoshop, change it to the size that you want, and then change it from CMYK to RGB color, and you'll be all set. Okay, so that really wraps up kind of these basic questions we had about unwrapping. So what I want to do now is I'm just going to quickly make a scene that has a handful of primitives in it and go over how to unwrap each one of those, and then maybe look at their default unwraps and see what those look like. Okay, we're back. We have a scene with just basic primitives in it. The one thing you just want to make sure is my sphere is, again, it came in subdivided. So again, if I look at the poly count of my whole scene, right now it's at 20,000. It probably shouldn't be that high. So let's isolate just him. He's 8,000 alone. Hit tab. Now it's at 500. Zooming in on that. Smoothing on, smoothing off. We want to make sure that that's off. Same thing, these toruses come in, isolate him, he's at 9,000, hit tab, now it's at 500. We just want to make sure that that smoothing isn't on any of these. So now all the smoothing is off, hit tab, now all the smoothing is on, and our scene's at almost 40,000. We want to keep it lower, because again, lower end computers aren't going to be able to handle this as well. So again, I'm just going to cover these kind of one at a time. So let's grab this guy first. Again, we already went over boxes, so I won't spend too much time on this. So again, it already has pretty much a good unwrap by default. Again, it's just stretched, so you could either stretch it out, or if you wanted to keep this unwrap, you can do select UV border because it's already been cut, unwrap, left click, right click. I have my good unwrap now. If I wanted to potentially move these little guys up or down, I could do that with the unwrap itself just by deselecting or selecting other edges. It just depends on kind of the look that I'm going for. But again, we kind of did a lot with the cube, so I'll pass over him. Next we'll look at the sphere. So the sphere's unwrap is going to be really weird. It's just going to have kind of all these faces. Let's grab all these real quick. Lasso select to make it a little easier. Zoom in. So this is going to be pretty much all these faces, and then turn the wireframe on. The top, it comes to this point right here, so it has all these little points that are going to be kind of zigzaggy up here. It looks like a bunch of teeth. Ideally, this would be hard to paint on, because again, if I wanted to, in Photoshop, make anything on the top of the sphere, let's grab all these. If I wanted to make like a circle going across here, I'd have to pretty much do a little line coming across here and a little line coming across here. You can see where this gets kind of annoying. So a common way to unwrap a sphere is, again, I can just double click around its middle, left click, right click, and this should give me two different, in a sense, circles that I can work with. Let's make this menu over here a little bit bigger. But if one of them's oblong, there's a handful of things over here that can kind of change this. So again, when I go over more advanced unwrapping stuff, we'll go into these settings in a little bit more detail. But you have conformal and angle based. So switch to conformal, you can see this one's kind of oblong, where it has kind of more area this way. Re-unwrap that. So toggling between these two could give you varied results. Again, throw a checker pattern on there, see what one you like better. Other one, this iterations, having this a little bit higher is going to potentially give you better results. So if I set it to something low like 10, it's really not unfolding that object very well. So in a sense, if I increase this to 100, 400, whatever, it's just going to make it more and more relaxed in a sense. So again, I usually just set that to about 400, and then you can usually leave it there. That gives you kind of a catch-all for like 80 to 90% of things you unwrap. But again, you can think of this as how relaxed the object that you're unwrapping is. So then there's kind of these 5 little buttons down here. You have this initial projection. So this is how should I treat the shape. So planar, flat, cylindrical, spherical, use current map, or group normal. So that's group, like what way the faces are pointing. So since this is a sphere, let's switch it to spherical. And lo and behold, if I go back, our little circles aren't centered. Go forward, now everything is centered. It knows to treat this like a sphere. Did a really good job. So we'll call that good for that one. Let's go ahead and look at this cylinder, and let's see what it gives us for unwrap. It gives us the top section cut off, the bottom section cut off, and then this, you can think of it just unwrapping it straight. So if you had a piece of paper rolled up, you're just unrolling that. So if we wanted to manually do this, we could just select these polygons, double click, select those, and now pick an edge coming up here. Ideally, let's say this was a can of soda, you wouldn't want your cut going through the text. If it said whatever the soda brand is going across right here, we'd want to go around to the back of the cube or the cylinder. Select these going all the way up, just hit the up arrow a few times, left click, right click. Now you can see that this area is still treated the same, but these areas shrunk down because going back to the original one, they just scaled up the top and bottom to fit these extents all the way, just to fill in this empty space. But ideally, if we wanted to throw our checker pattern on here, if I zoom into this, there's going to be kind of little checkers right here and then big ones on the side. So again, this isn't technically the end of the world to do this, but again, ideally you'd want these to be pretty much the same size. So if I manually unwrap that, what's going to happen is it's pretty much just going to shrink those down a little bit. But saying realistically, that's how you're going to handle unwrapping a cylinder. Let's go to this next one. I'm just hiding these so you see one at a time. So by default, what it's going to do is project straight down from the top. So if I go to the top view, it's going to look correct. If I go to the bottom view, it's going to look correct. But if I go to any other type of view, it's just really, really warped, because you can think of this, if you put a round sheet on this, it hit right here, and then you just stretched it all the way down. That's kind of what it did. So ideally we don't want that, because again, we don't have square pixels on here, so this would be annoying to work with. So what we're going to do is the bottom, just treat it like a cylinder. We'll just cut that whole section off. And now this, just like the cylinder, we're just going to go all the way up. But instead of reaching another like top of the can, it just comes to a point right here. So unwrap, left click, right click, and we get this as a result. So again, not anything too crazy at all. But if I look at this, we have little squares everywhere as opposed to those long warped ones. So again, this should be fine. Let's go ahead and look at this torus. So this, their default, is they just kind of have this unwrapped in a square fashion, so it seems really weird. If I go to the inside, everything seems fine. As soon as I go to the outside, it gets stretched more and more and more, because it's kind of wrapping around this round object. So there's a handful of ways that you can kind of unwrap these. One, you can just double click to kind of cut this donut, in a sense, in a half. Long way, so you'd have your, in a sense, top half of the donut here, bottom half of the donut there. So to make sure that we get the outer ring and the inner ring, left click, right click. Now we have the same thing right here, top half of a donut and a bottom half of a donut. Alternatively, I can treat this kind of like a cylinder that just wraps into itself. So since it wraps into itself, the top and the bottom would be the same. And then we just need a piece that was going like up the side of the cylinder. So let's try it on the outside first. Left click, right click. We get this weird scenario. So again, iterations, if I increase those, I'd try to relax it more. This is kind of maxed out as far as how relaxed it is. So let's try that again. Do the inside cut though. Left click, right click. Now it gives us this. So again, this is potentially where these settings are going to help. So spherical, switch to planar, it gives us this result. Let's actually undo this a few times. There we go. So we can switch through here, planar, cylindrical, spherical. None of these are really giving me that good of results. The other thing that you can do is you have these pinning axes. I won't really go into detail about what these cover, but again, you can get varied results from these. But realistically, to make this work, we'd probably want to cut it in half on the inside and the outside, and then around. And again, we get the same similar scenario, but with the settings that I gave, this inner circle and outer circle are a little bit rounder as opposed to being how it was before, just a little bit oblong like that. But realistically, this is fine for unwrapping this torus. So let's go into this shape. So again, looking at this, what I can think of it as is it's just a box with this section kind of cut out of it. So if this was a cardboard box, technically this could still be a flap. This could still be an independent flap, but this is kind of the part that's a little bit weird. So for right now, I'm just going to hide this. So let's go ahead and just cut off, as a first step, just this top piece and see what happens. So left click, right click, and right off the bat, something a little bit weird's happening. I'm not sure why. So let's look over here. Okay, our iterations are set to 0. Ideally, those should be a little bit higher. So let's set them to 400. That's just the default that I always set them to. Again, 100 to give you really similar results, but old habits die hard, I guess. So when I cut off just this top, we get something like this. So again, this bottom area is a little bit wrecked and super stretched, but this one breaks off just fine. So let's go ahead and add to this. So let's uncut that edge, cut this one, and now hit unwrap and see what it does. So again, now we have this. So the top flap right here, and then this back flap. So let's add the bottom to it. So uncut that, cut this one, unwrap that. So now I have kind of two different pieces. So let's uncut this, cut this all the way around. So this, instead of it being a set of 3, it's going to wrap all the way around and have these 2 flaps on the edges. So let's actually attach these edge flaps so they're attached to this back section. So again, this side and this side, I want them attached to this back, which would be selected on this edge and this edge, not that guy. So let's do select UV border. So what I want to do is just deselect or uncut here, here, and here, and here. So now let's see what this does. Unwrap, right click. So now we have this kind of square going on. Again, without this piece right here and this little piece right here, we just have our little default lowercase t that we had before when we unwrapped a box. So let's unhide what's going on here. So now we just have this inner box to deal with. So let's look at just him, hide this, let's just unwrap it, see what happens, and of course nothing works. So let's make cuts in these corners. So we should have 3 different pieces, 1, 2, 3. Ideally we could probably do this in one piece, so let's deselect that, hit unwrap, there we go, now we got a big T shape. So let's undo this, and again, when I unhide this, I'm unhiding all of these objects, so it makes it really cluttered over here. So let's double click, isolate that selection. Now I have this small piece, oops, rotate that 90 degrees. This bigger piece, let's see if orient doesn't get that straight. That one's already oriented. And now, ideally, if I look at these, the checkers sizes are about the same. This one's a little bit smaller than this one. So let's just do a quick pack and we'll just have just stretch on. Hit OK. Now they kind of line right up. So scale that down. Now I have just this one shape unwrapped in one-to-one space. So now if I look at this here, all these checkers on the inside all look good. Everything on the outside looks good. So we're good to go on this one. So again, if I zoom out, look at all 3 of these shapes. The strategies that I used to unwrap all these were definitely different. Let's do a quick pack of everything. So again, how this packed is it through our box right here, our spheres and 2 halves right here, cylinder, sides, top and bottom, cone, the main body and the bottom, torus here and here, and then this box it threw in 2 separate corners. But regardless, looking at this, hitting select, UV borders, you can see how each one of these was cut, and they were kind of treated differently because again, anything that you unwrap should be unwrapped kind of as its own unique piece. Just like when you modeled it, you don't use the techniques of modeling a hand as you do as modeling somebody's face. They're 2 different objects. You model them separate, you'd unwrap them separately, because again, they're 2 different things that should be treated differently.